Hello everyone. I asked my viewers what new abilities, moves, mechanics, and or Pokemon they'd like to see in Generation 10, and I got hundreds of responses. I've picked 10 of them to review, some of which are the ideas that received the most likes, others are ones that I personally found the most interesting. Every idea I'll be ranking from 0 to 5 in 3 categories. First of all, how likely is this idea or something very similar to be implemented by the developers? 0 is not likely at all, 5 is very likely. Secondly, how good would this idea be competitively? 0 would be not great at all and likely not impact the competitive scene in the slightest, and 5 would be absolutely broken. Lastly, third, how much I personally like the idea. 0 if I really dislike it, and 5 if I love it. I'll be looking at these ideas mostly through the lens of competitive singles, as that is my area of expertise. I will still consider doubles when it's extremely relevant though, like when we go over the obligatory ability that sets Trick Room idea that everyone commented. For background footage, enjoy some games from recent live streams. Alright, let's get into it. First up, Junction says, an ability that functions like Cloud9 but for terrain would be cool, especially on a bulky support Pokemon that can stick around on the field. This comment had a ton of likes, which shocked me since Cloud9 is a very unremarkable ability. It disables the effects of weather while that Pokemon is on the field. It doesn't end weather either, just temporarily disables the effects. Furthermore, terrain often isn't as heavily relied upon as weather. A rain team won't function well without rain, a sun team won't function well without sun, but an offense team with a Tapu Koko really won't mind if a Pokemon with this theoretical ability cancels electric terrain for a couple turns. And even terrain teams that do heavily rely on terrain, like Psychic Terrain Hyper Offense, probably won't care much about whatever Pokemon has this terrain stopping ability. If it's a defensive Pokemon, as the viewer said, it probably won't have priority. And, most importantly, if this ability functions like Cloud9, it won't end the terrain, just disable it for a little bit. So all you need to do is go into a terrain abuser that also threatens this theoretical Pokemon, and you're all set. I'd say the likelihood of this is about a 4. I could see Nintendo realistically doing this, or maybe even just buffing Cloud9 to do this. Slapping an ability like this onto some random Pokemon seems pretty realistic. How good it would be? I'll give it a 1. Not completely useless, but pretty close. None of the Pokemon with the ability Cloud9 currently use it, and I can't imagine the terrain version would be much better. As for how much I like the idea, I'll give it a 2.5, right down the middle. I'm not excited about this idea, but I don't dislike it. It just wouldn't do anything. It really wouldn't change my Pokemon playing experience or enjoyment in any way. Next up, Dr. Bognor says, in addition to the obvious speed control on entry abilities, maybe something like setting gravity on entry would be a cool thing to think about. So I figured we want to get this obvious one out of the way, the speed control abilities. So this means setting Trick Room and Tailwind on entry. In singles, this would not be broken. Trick Room only lasts 5 turns, Tailwind only lasts 4 turns. You have to select the move Trick Room previously, then switch out into the setter and start taking advantage. You can have a setter and abuser be the same Pokemon, something like a Life Orb or Uniclus can do this, but the strongest Trick Room Pokemon like Ursaluna, they do need to be switched in. Tailwind is pretty much the same deal. It doesn't have negative priority of Trick Room, which is nice, but with only 4 turns, counting the turn you set it, it leaves you with only 2 turns to take advantage, unless you use an eject button or get KO'd on the turn you set Tailwind. I've tried both archetypes and had decent success on the latter with them, but they're really not amazing by any means, and I don't think a setting ability would push either of them over the edge. However, in doubles, these abilities would be absolutely insane. Trick Room and Tailwind have been top tier moves in doubles for a long time, and not having to actually click the move would be way too much. For this reason, I don't see it being implemented. I'll give it a 1 out of 5 chance on that. I can't think Nintendo would make such a big balancing mistake for their own format, VGC. As for how good it would be, for doubles, easily a 5. For singles, I'd give it a 4. They'd be pretty meta-game changing abilities that would make Trick Room and Tailwind real archetypes for singles, so it would be significant, if not totally broken. And as for how much I'd like it, I'll say a 4. I think this would be great and a lot of fun for singles, but I won't give it a 5 because I know this would absolutely destroy the doubles scene. Okay, now that we've gone over the obvious ones, let's discuss the second part of this take, the gravity setting ability. This is an interesting one. For those that don't know, gravity makes every Pokemon grounded. So Earthquake can now hit flying types, Levitate Pokemon and flying types will now take damage from spikes and are affected by toxic spikes and sticky web and so on. The main thing though is that ground types can just spam ground attacks with no immunities. Gravity has been used with Choice Band, Excadrill, and Sand teams. That's probably the most common implementation I've seen. These teams have never been amazing since Gravity only lasts 5 turns, and you do currently need to use a move to set it, but having an ability to do that could really push these teams to the next level. If you look at something like Zygarde 10% with 1,000 Arrows, a ground move that hits flying types, you'll just see how amazingly spammable ground moves are when you don't have to worry about flying types and levitate. Even with an unimpressive base 100 attack and 486 base stat total, Zygarde 10% sees real usage in Gen 8 OU. Now that being said, I don't think this ability would necessarily be broken. It would simply change the metagame a lot. Currently, flying types are near mandatory on teams because they're immune to ground. If a decent Pokemon got this gravity setting ability, we'd likely see more actual ground resists, bug and grass types. Those would become a lot more popular. I think this is a fun idea. I'll give it a 2 on likelihood of being implemented, since we haven't seen any abilities for other similar field effects, but it's definitely not impossible. For how good it would be, I'll say 4. Not super broken, but it would absolutely shift the metagame like crazy, and flying types in general would get a lot worse depending on how good the Pokemon with the ability is. And as for how much I like it, I'll give it a 5. I love gravity teams and ground types in general, and I'd love to see them get even better. It's not as meta-relevant, but the accuracy buff Gravity gives is also pretty cool. I'd be able to finally hit a Focus Blast, and even really low accuracy moves like Zap Cannon aren't too bad at 83% accuracy in Gravity. Hustle Pokemon would also get a nice buff for this. Definitely the ground type buff would be the most significant, but being able to see these very little used super inaccurate moves would be pretty cool. Next, continuing on with this idea, Tribune Aquila says, an item like Light Clay or Terrain Extender, but for Trick Room that extends Trick Room by 3 turns. Maybe this will finally give Trick Room viability in singles. So this is a much more moderate version of the idea we just discussed. Not a setting ability, but simply an extension item. This would help a lot in singles, and it would definitely make Trick Room go from kind of a joke to a very real archetype. I expect it would be very popular in doubles as well. Not as much of a buff as an ability that sets it immediately, but still really good. Problem is, as I said, with how good Trick Room already is in doubles, I just don't see this being implemented. I'll give it a 2 out of 5 on the odds of being added. As for how good it would be, I'd say probably a 4 for both singles and doubles. It would be an absolute game changer in singles and probably a noticeable improvement in doubles as well, but it's not my area of expertise, so I can't quite say. And as for how much I like it, I'll say 5. For singles, I think this would be a huge win for Trick Room, and I'd say it deserves it. It would make Trick Room a real archetype, but definitely not broken. Shifting gears here a bit, Aki Penser says, Steel Dragon Mega Haxorus that leans heavily into making Haxorus the ferocious wall breaker it was always meant to be. I expect Mega Heracross level attack. Haxorus has been done so dirty. It has the feeling of a pseudo-legendary, and then you notice that it has pretty terrible bulk, only 76 HP, 90 defense, and 70 special defense. Not awful, but it needs a lot more. Using this Pokemon just feels terrible. It dies to everything, it's weak to tons of priority, it can't handle fairy types well at all. It's really just tragic. They also really could have made it a steel type because it literally has axes on its face, but they just didn't do it. Making Haxorus a steel type would instantly make it so much better. It would resist more priority moves, not be so weak to fairy, immune to toxic. It would be exactly what Haxorus needs, and it deserves a mega evolution. Baxcalibur and Dragonite didn't need one at all, and they got one, so where is the love for Haxorus? With Legend ZA out and no Mega Haxorus in sight, it might seem like hope is lost, but there have been some DLC leaks that imply we could get a Mega Haxorus. With how beloved this Pokemon is, I'd say there's a pretty good chance, I'll give it a 3, that this gets implemented, and surely they won't miss the opportunity to make it a Steel type, I hope. As for how good it would be, I'll say a 4. Steel Dragon is amazing offensively and defensively, and it really suits Haxorus' move pool well. It might even get banned to Ubers, but if it sticks around in OU, I think it would be a real threat. And as for how much I like the idea, you could probably tell it's a 5. I love Haxorus, and I want to see it get the treatment it deserves. Next up, we have another interesting ability idea. Parrot Royale says speed boost, but for other stats. For example, Mega Scolipede with defense boost. This one is pretty cool because I'd never really considered it before. But before I get into that, if you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Okay, so Speed Boost is obviously an insane ability. It's caused several bans throughout the generations, and for very good reason. Being able to get faster just by using Protect, and you pair that with a setup move, you will become extremely threatening. If there was an Evasion boost that worked like this, obviously that's broken. Some are obviously not broken, though. I don't think this would be a huge issue if it was defense or special defense or critical hit boosting each turn. Attack and special attack are the ones that I think would be another major problem. If a Pokemon could just use Substitute and Protect, get to 4 times attack or special attack, and kill everything. So if you give your opponent 1 free turn to set up a substitute, at least one thing on your team is probably going to die. Now, of course, there is counterplay, like multi-hit moves that can go through the substitute, sound moves, infiltrator, and just unaware Pokemon to ignore the boost, but I still think this special attack or attack boosting would be way too much. That being said, defense and special defense would be pretty cool, not too broken at all, and really thematically appropriate on quite a few Pokemon. Odds of implementation aren't great, I'd say around a 2. How good it would be? Pretty good, solid ability, but nothing game-breaking. I'll say 3. Now, if we're talking about attack or special attack, or God forbid evasion, it's an easy 5. That would be totally broken. And as for how much I like it, I'll give it a 4. I think these would be fun abilities. I absolutely love using Speed Boost Pokemon. Scolipede and Blaziken are epic, so I'd probably enjoy these abilities as well. Now let's talk about a mechanic change. Robin Left says, I'd be interested to see ZA's implementation of Mega Evolution adapted into the main line. Make it last for, say, 3 turns, but be able to recharge so you can Mega multiple times in a battle. Would definitely throw off the balance of a lot of already existing Megas, but I'd be interested in seeing dual Mega teams appearing in singles. This is a super cool one. In all previous generations where we have Mega Evolutions, you're limited to 1 per battle. ZA works a bit differently. I'll briefly explain how their system works for those that aren't familiar. So, ZA isn't turn-based. It's more of a cooldown, live battling system. You need to build up Mega power in a battle, and once you have enough, you can Mega Evolve a Pokemon, and it'll stay Mega Evolved until your Mega power drops below a certain threshold, and you can Mega Evolve multiple Pokemon. The commenter here wants to mimic that in Generation 10 with a system where you're allowed to Mega Evolve as many Pokemon as you want, but it only lasts for 3 turns at a time, maybe with some kind of recharge meter. This is a really interesting one. I'd say there's a good chance we'll see something like this implemented, maybe a 3 out of 5. As for how good it would be to Mega Evolve multiple times in a game, I'll give it a 4. Not as game-breaking as most would think, I suspect. Some very successful teams in Generation 7, the last generation where we had Mega Evolutions, chose not to run a Mega Evolution at all. And many teams that run Mega Evolutions just want that one. Other Pokemon running items offer unique benefits that no Mega can match. Items like Heavy Duty Boots, Rocky Helmet, Choice Scarf, Choice Band on the right Pokemon can be a lot better than a slot used on Mega Evolutions, and there aren't tons of really good Mega Evolutions, so this is another limitation. Even if there was no turn restriction or recharge meter and you could Mega Evolve as many Pokemon as you want with no drawbacks, I don't think we'd see teams spamming tons of Mega Evolutions. I could see 2, maybe 3 Megas becoming a normal amount, but likely not more than that. And I don't see that as a huge issue. I think a lot of Megas were really cool, fun, and creative Pokemon. So for how much I personally like this idea, I'll give it a 4. Alright, now for a crazy popular idea. I saw like a dozen people comment something almost exactly like this. Year of the Bows 24 says, other type variants of Freeze Dry. Tinkaton should get one that hits steel types, Bug should have one that hits Fairy for 2 times damage, etc. Obviously don't go overboard and keep the distribution small, since otherwise it will make the type chart flip on its head. This comment pretty concisely expresses my concerns with the idea. If freeze-dry-esque moves are everywhere, then the type chart becomes a lot less meaningful. For those that aren't familiar, freeze-dry is a 70 base power ice-type special attack that hits water types super effectively. Normally water resists ice. And they were pretty generous with the distribution. A lot of ice types get it. In OU, Curem notably uses freeze-dry all the time, and because of that, it's a lot harder to deal with. So theoretically, something like a dark move called Malicious Spell could hit fairy type super effectively, or a psychic move called Mind's Light could hit dark type super effectively, but they'd be weak moves somewhere in the 60 to 70 power range. That's the general idea. I think moves like this could be cool, as the commenter said, on very specific Pokemon, like Tinkaton having a steel move that's super effective against steel types, since large hammers are used in forging. That would be pretty cool. The concern is just that if too many of these moves exist, it really becomes a strain on the builder. Tinkaton isn't an offensive powerhouse now, but with this move, maybe it would be. I mean, Kyurem is an absolute nightmare to build for an OU, largely thanks to Freeze Dry. So even if distribution was quite sparse, all it really takes is for a single powerful Pokemon to get access to one of these moves, and suddenly the type chart is just a lot less reliable. If it was exclusively kept on Pokemon with terrible offenses, then sure, it's fine, but then what's the point? I'll give this idea a 2 on my personal preference scale. As far as likelihood of implementation, I'll say about a 3. They've done it before and they might do it again, but I think the developers will understand that you don't want to make too many moves like this. And as for how good it would be, I'll say 4. If just a single good Pokemon gets a move like this, like if Tapu Lele gets a psychic move that hits dark type super effectively, that's an absolute game changer. It wouldn't break the tier, and it definitely could be handled, but these moves would be really, really good. Now let's address another super popular idea. Max says, rework Freeze into Frostbite from Legends Arceus, give it a burn effect but for special attackers, and increase all Ice-type moves from having a 10% freeze chance to 15 to 20% Frostbite chance and a Frostbite Will-O-Wisp. So everyone hates Freeze as it currently works. It's a 10% chance on a bunch of moves, and if you get frozen, you can't move at all, and you will have only a 20% chance to unfreeze each turn. It just sucks. There's really nothing you can do about it when you get frozen, and one of the only reliable ways to unfreeze, Scald, got its distribution heavily cut. The recommended replacement, Frostbite, halves special attack and deals 6.25% damage each turn. I think this would be a great change. A lot of steel types are physical attackers, and those are common switch-ins to ice types, so Frostbite wouldn't be the end of the world for them. Since the effect is less powerful, it probably would be fair to boost the chance to 15 or 20%. I agree with the commentator on this. It would also make the freeze effect a lot more reliable as a status condition for the user. I've seen some people express concern that an effect like this would be an unneeded nerf to special attackers, but I don't see this as a real issue. Ice moves aren't that common, and as I said, a lot of common switch-ins to ice types are physical attacking steels. I just don't see this moving the needle for special attackers much at all. Now, the Frostbite Will-O-Wisp part, I don't like at all. This, I do think, would be an unfair and unneeded nerf to special attackers, but I love the rest of this take. I'd give this idea a 5 on my personal scale if we remove the Frostbite Will-O-Wisp part. I think it would be a great change. As for how likely, I'll say a 4. Clearly, the developers already saw the need for this change when they implemented it in Legends Arceus, and although Scarlet and Violet did come out after Legends Arceus with the old freeze mechanics, it was probably too far along in development to change that. Maybe after seeing the positive response from fans, this will be implemented at some point in the main series games. And lastly, as far as how good it would be, it kind of doesn't really apply to this question, but I'll give it a 1. Ice moves with freeze chance aren't that common, it's mostly just Ice Beam and Freeze Dry, and even with a 20% chance for Frostbite, you won't see this effect often, and it just wouldn't be that big of a deal. Now let's talk about some ideas for new Pokemon. Seth Vasquez says, I would like more third stage evolutions for pre-existing pokes, like Houndoom. Reminiscent to Gen 4, there are still many pokes whose designs feel unfinished. Cough, Sunflora, cough. I don't care if they have megas already, Floette blew that stipulation up already. I like this idea a lot. I'm not too big of a fan of the Houndoom part. I think it's weird to give an extra evolution to something that already has a mega, and Floette is very clearly a special case. But for things like Sunflora, absolutely, let's see something happen there. It's got a very simple design, its stats are terrible, nobody ever uses it or thinks about it. Why not give it an extra evolution? I'd also like to see a branch-off evolution in the Porygon line, where Porygon 2 can evolve into something that's not the glitch that created Porygon Z. Luminion could use some help with another evolution. Also, it deserves Tail Glow. Random stuff like Palo Sand, I could see evolving from a sand castle into a sand fortress. That would be sick. I basically always love seeing old Pokemon get new evolutions, so I'll give this a 5 in my personal opinion. As far as likelihood, also a 5. Developers did this in Generation 9 with the Dunsparce. They'll probably do it in Generation 10 with some other Pokemon. Maybe not with Sunflora specifically, but probably with something. And as far as how good it would be, once again, kind of doesn't apply to this question, but I'll say 4, since a lot of added evolutions are pretty darn good. Now for a take about an ability. Mango Scaptor says, what I want, Special Attack Intimidate. What we'll get, at least one new slow, bulky ice type. I'll address the joke first. The developers do seem to love putting slow, bulky ice types in the game, and it's pretty tragic. Every slow, bulky ice type is basically doomed to be terrible, with the ice being the worst defensive typing in the game. But yeah, they probably won't stop anytime soon. 5 for likelihood for sure. Now the actual main idea here, a Special Attack Intimidate. I do not like this idea. I talked a little earlier about how I don't think Frostbite would really hurt special attackers, but a Special Intimidate, especially if on a good Pokemon, really would be a significant force. On first glance, you might think that special attackers have it too good. Physical attackers have to deal with Intimidate, Burns, Rocky Helmet, contact abilities like Rough Skin, Flame Body, and Static. Special attackers don't have to deal with any of that. However, there are other things to consider. Physical attackers generally have stronger moves. Close Combat, Earthquake, Flare Blitz, Wood Hammer, Head Smash, Knockoff, Power Whip. The best special attacking move that isn't balanced by significant downsides is probably Moonblast, which is 95 base power, 100 accuracy, and has a 30% chance to drop special attack. Now, there are really strong special attacks like Overheat, Draco Meteor, and Leaf Storm, but they're balanced by accuracy and the -2 special attack after one use. The vast majority of priority moves and pivoting moves are also physical. Special attackers also have lower special attack stats often than physical attackers have attack. They also have to deal with Assault Vest, for which there is no equal on the physical side. I'm not trying to argue that physical attackers are better, but I'm saying that despite all the challenges physical attackers have to face, I think the two are pretty well balanced where they are right now. Adding a Special Intimidate, especially if a good Pokemon gets it, just seems like a nerf that doesn't need to happen. I'll give this a 1 on my personal scale. For likelihood, I'll say 2. Seems possible, but given how insane Intimidate is in VGC, I doubt the developers will want to shake up the metagame by adding a special option for that. And as for how good it would be, I'll say 4. Not a game-breaking ability, but really solid, and it would definitely be great on a lot of Pokemon. Now, that's 10 ideas, but I figured I'd add in one bonus idea. Jimothy Cool says, Mega Muck. I love this. I love Muck, particularly Alolan Muck, and I think it would be epic to see it get a Mega Evolution. I'll give it a 4 on my personal scale because Muck is the best. Probably a 2 for likelihood of implementation since Muck hasn't gotten any love since its Alolan form, and sadly probably a 2 for how good it would be. All decent Muck sets rely heavily on the item they hold, whether that's Sticky Hold Heavy Duty Boots as a knockoff absorber on regular Muck or Assault Vest on Alolan Muck. It would need to get some pretty crazy stat buffs and a really good ability for the Mega to be worthwhile. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my assessment, and tell me if you have any Gen 10 ideas of your own. I'm excited to see what the new games bring. See you guys next time.